Okay, let's dig into this. When we think about, big life changes, the conversation often gets really focused on the mechanics.
Yeah, the numbers, the biology, the how-to.
Exactly. And if you're looking at something like weight loss, well, it's usually all about the diet plan, the exercise, that initial physical bit.
Right. We tend to celebrate that first phase, don't we? Hitting the goal.
But what about after?
Hmm. What happens when the biology, let's say, has done its main job and the scale kind of settles? That whole landscape
Hmm.
that's often just not talked about.
And that's precisely what we want to explore in this deep dive. We're trying to step beyond just the biological how, and we're leaning heavily on insights from Dan Hollis's work here.
Our mission really is to unpack the psychological stuff, the emotional side that comes out after those first physical changes settle down.
It's about understanding what's going on when the really intense biological signals quiet down a bit.
And why the narrative, the story you build and actually live in that space is so, so critical for making the change last.
Yeah, because there's this surprising truth that seems to pop up when that loud biological hunger starts to fade, isn't there?
Absolutely. It opens up a totally different kind of conversation
What about identity, maybe? And what cravings really mean?
and the kind of support that's genuinely needed to, well, navigate that new space.
Okay, so let's start with Dan Hollis's core idea here. It feels really central to the sources. He puts it very plainly. Weight loss is biology. Staying there is narrative.
It's so concise, right? And it just shifts the focus immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The initial process, shedding the physical weight, that involves big biological shifts, metabolism, hormones, energy.
It's biology kicking things off, giving you that push.
Right. And what Dan's pointing out is that sustaining it, the staying there bit,
Mm.
it's not just about keeping up that same intense biological fight forever.
It becomes more about the story you're living, the person you are after that initial shift.
Fundamentally, yes. This deep dive is really zeroing in on that phase after the scale has tipped.
It's recognizing the journey keeps going, but it moves inward.
Exactly. Into that terrain of identity, emotion, learned habits, stuff that needs conscious navigating and shaping.
So, if the usual before and after stuff highlights the physical win, what's often missed in that time after the goal is hit, after the party's over, so to speak, what's left?
Well, the sources talk about a kind of silence, a
A
space. Yeah,
space.
maybe a space that wasn't there before because perhaps old habits filled it or buffered it. And into that space, something can emerge that Dan Hollis actually calls identity grief.
Identity grief. Wow. That phrase really stops you. It sounds like loss, but about who you are.
It's that feeling,
Mm.
looking in the mirror, clothes fitting differently, and realizing the outside changed, but the inside, it hasn't quite caught up.
A kind of disorientation.
Yeah, like not quite recognizing yourself without the old context of the weight. It's in that quote from the sources. The weight came off, then I realized I had no idea who I was without it.
That's powerful, and not something you usually hear about in those transformation stories.
Not usually, no. But the sources really stress it's a real psychological thing people experience.
And it sounds like the body's signals, like hunger, they don't just disappear either.
No, they sort of
Yeah,
shapeshift. That's how the sources describe it.
shapeshift. Into what?
Into other internal states, maybe memory, confusion.
Yeah.
It kind of occupies that new space that's opened up.
Okay, and that sounds vulnerable.
It is. Because if that internal space isn't actively filled with something um, genuinely nourishing for the self, something addressing deeper needs, the old pattern, the craving, it tends to creep back in.
So less about the stomach literally rumbling again.
And more about an internal, I don't know, void or a question that hasn't been answered.
Makes sense.
And Dan Hollis has this really key insight here. He says people don't relapse into hunger, they relapse into confusion.
Ah, okay. So the craving that comes back isn't necessarily pure biological hunger like before.
Often not. It's frequently a signal tied to that unresolved confusion, maybe the lack of a solid identity footing in the new physical reality.
So the answer then is about building something new in that space. What does that actually involve?
It's fundamentally about building, or, as the sources put it, creating scaffolding.
Scaffolding, like for construction?
Kind of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It means consciously building new rituals, new ways of being, finding new responses, and weaving them into daily life where the old food habits used to live.
So you learn to see that craving differently.
Exactly. Not as, like, a failure or an enemy you have to fight, but more like a messenger, a signal saying something inside still needs attention, but maybe a different kind of attention.
And the sources definitely emphasize support here.
Oh, absolutely critical. Support in this phase, it's not just nice to have. The sources call it neurobiological scaffolding.
Neurobiological scaffolding. Okay, break that down.
Think of it like providing the essential structure while you're building new pathways in your brain,
Yeah,
solidifying new habits.
right.
Just like real scaffolding supports a building while it's being built, external support therapy, coaching, community, whatever works for you, helps support that internal rewiring.
The rewiring needed to handle that post-change landscape and respond to signals differently.
Yes, it's pretty much necessary for building that new internal structure, that new sense of self.
Okay, that leads us neatly into another big concept from Dan Hollis, this idea of a hunger that isn't in the stomach.
Right. This is where we get into emotional hunger. And Dan reframes it really powerfully. He says, emotional hunger sounds like a craving, but it's actually a question, a need asking to be seen.
A need asking to be seen. Wow, that completely changes how you might hear a craving, doesn't it?
Totally. It's not just an urge anymore. It's potentially information.
So are we often just misreading our own signals?
The sources suggest, yes, very often. We misinterpret other states as physical hunger. Maybe we're tired or lonely or feeling overwhelmed, maybe just bored or anxious.
But food has been the go-to fix.
Exactly. It's been the learned response to discomfort for many people. So we default to thinking hunger. We grab a snack, when maybe what we actually need is, I don't know, connection, a chat with someone, or just a break, rest, clarity.
And what's it like when food stops being that buffer, when you're not using it that way anymore?
Well, the sources talk about feeling exposed.
Exposed.
Yeah. The quote is, when food stops being your emotional scaffolding, so when you stop using it to prop up or numb difficult feelings, you don't just feel lighter, you feel exposed.
Because you're suddenly face to face with those feelings without the usual buffer.
Precisely. The underlying needs, the emotions, they're right there.
But Hollis doesn't frame this as, like, a weakness, something to be ashamed of.
Not at all. He actually calls this pattern wisdom misdirected.
Wisdom misdirected. I like that.
Yeah, it's like the body and mind are using the language they know craving food to try and communicate a different need. The real work is learning to pause, get curious, and figure out what that signal actually means.
So practically speaking, the first step is just pausing instead of reacting straight away.
Exactly. Instead of that automatic reach for food or beating yourself up for even having the craving, you pause.
And bring curiosity.
Yes. Ask yourself honestly, what am I really hungry for right now? That question, that's the doorway to understanding the signal, not just reacting to it.
Now, the sources also bring in modern medical tools here, specifically mentioning medications like semaglutide. People know them as Ozempic or Wegovy, originally for diabetes, but now widely used for weight loss.
Yes, the GLP-1 receptor agonists. The sources explain that what these medications primarily do is create a significant pause on the biological side of things.
How so?
They slow down digestion, reduce appetite signals.
Hmm.
They basically quiet down those really intense biological hunger cues that can feel overwhelming.
So they turn down the volume on the biological noise.
Correct. The physiological craving gets quieter. But, and this is really crucial according to the sources, they do not solve the emotional hunger piece.
No.
Ken Hollis puts it this way. Semaglutide isn't the solution to emotional eating. It's the silence that lets you find one.
The silence that lets you find one. That's powerful. So by quieting the loud biological stuff, it creates the space, the opportunity to actually hear the quieter emotional signals.
Precisely. That's the potential benefit these tools can offer. Reducing the biological static gives you the mental and emotional bandwidth to finally identify, understand, and start addressing the emotional hunger.
It creates a window then, a pause.
A critical window, yes. A pause where you can focus on rebuilding that identity, changing behaviors, developing emotional awareness, all without the constant shouting of physical cravings.
And this loops right back to that neurobiological scaffolding you mentioned. It becomes absolutely essential here.
Yes. Non-negotiable, really, in this context. When the biological noise dials down, that space has to be filled constructively.
Otherwise,
Old patterns rush back in, or maybe new unhelpful ones form. That support, the structure, learning new coping skills, that scaffolding is what helps you build new responses and a stronger sense of self in that quieter space.
it's about integrating new rituals, learning to see those lingering cravings not as enemies.
But as messengers, signals to be met with curiosity and insight, not just impulse or suppression.
It really feels like Dan Hollis is kind of flipping the script on when the real work actually starts.
He totally is. He teaches that the deep, sustainable change doesn't kick in at the start, not during the fastest weight loss phase. It starts when you get to a point where you no longer need food to manage or explain or buffer your feelings.
When the cravings stop, the truth begins.
Yeah.
That's another quote, right?
That captures it perfectly. Healing emotional hunger isn't about macros or meal plans, ultimately.
It's about
Self-empathy, deep awareness of your internal world, and the courage to keep asking that question behind the urge. What is this really asking for?
because if you don't address that deeper narrative,
Hmm.
what happens?
Well, the biology might give you the initial win, but the psychology, it's waiting. And it can easily pull the rug out from under those results if the foundational work on identity, emotion, and behavior isn't done.
So what Dan Hollis seems to offer, it isn't just another diet plan or even just commentary on drugs.
No, not at all. According to these sources, he's offering the language to understand these subtle internal shifts.
And the scaffolding concept.
Yes, the idea of scaffolding to guide the rebuilding and support in constructing a new narrative memory, helping people kind of stitch together the story of who they're becoming.
Helping them come home to themselves, as the source puts it.
Exactly, in their new physical and emotional reality.
And ultimately, this reframes the whole point of the journey.
It shifts the entire goal, yeah. The big takeaway from Dan Hollis based on these sources is this. This journey isn't about eating less, it's about living more.
Wow. Okay, so pulling this all together from our deep dive into Dan Hollis's work, it seems sustainable change, especially after something like weight loss. It's far less about just continuing to fight biology forever.
And much more about the internal work. It's fundamentally about building or maybe rebuilding your identity
Understanding and really compassionately addressing your emotional needs.
and creating those essential support structures, that neurobiological scaffolding we talked about, to really navigate and thrive in the space that opens up when the loudest biological signals fade.
Learning to actually understand that silence and hear the questions hidden inside what you used to just call cravings, that seems like a massive step.
It really does. And, while we focused on weight loss here because of the source material, this idea feels much bigger.
How so?
Well, any significant life change, right? A career shift, maybe overcoming an addiction, adapting to a loss. It often involves navigating a new sense of self.
Figuring out who you are now in this changed reality.
Yeah, and finding new, healthier ways to meet those fundamental human needs for connection, comfort, purpose, clarity, that maybe old patterns were sort of papering over.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? A final thought maybe for you, listening. What silent stories might you discover about yourself when the loudest noise in your life starts to quiet down?